Hey everyone, so this video is, I would say almost more, I'm doing it to help myself out, but I think it'll help a lot of people out too. And it's basically 6 tips to get even better landscape photography from the air with a drone. So I just got this. This is the DJI Mavic 3. Um, DJI just announced it a week ago or so, and I placed an order and I got it. And the reason why I got the Mavic 3 is because about a year ago, my Mavic 2 Pro, which I loved, met an untimely demise in Lake Coeur d'Alene. And rather than buy a Mavic 2 Pro, which was already several years old, I figured I'll wait for DJI to release the Mavic 3. I did not expect them to take a year basically to announce it, or the price, which it is kind of expensive. But the point is that I've been spending a bunch of time lately flying the drone, specifically more for still photos. I use it for video as well. I do some stock video work using the drone, but I thought this would be a good opportunity to just go through some photos and talk through some techniques, things that I know for myself, I don't necessarily remember or keep in mind when I've got my drone up there. And again, it's one of those things, when it's completely different photography or video with a drone compared to a camera, partly because you've got this thing flying in the air and that's kind of nerve wracking. But also, you have about 20 to 30 minutes of flying time, depending on the battery, depending on weather conditions, if it's windy, if it's cold. And you really need to kind of be on point when you've got your drone in the air. You need to make sure you know what you're doing so that you can get the most out of that time. I've only got 3 batteries, so that's, I get about an hour total, maybe a little bit more, again, depending on the conditions. And I want to make sure that I make the most out of that time. So what I would like to do is jump over to the computer, and like I said, I've got 6 tips, just kind of, I think these are broadly applicable. There's nothing that you need to use a Mavic drone, for example. Just about any drone that you can put up in the air, I think these tips will apply to. So let's jump over to the computer right now. And the first tip is probably the broadest, and that is leverage the benefits of flight. So you have a camera that you can put hundreds of feet into the air. I mean, that's pretty amazing. And the cameras, especially with this camera, I've got to give, tip of the hat to DJI. They really crushed it with this particular camera on the Mavic 3. But if you're able to put your camera in the air, make the most of it. And so, for example, here's a photo that I took of Panther Creek Falls. Now, I've got a bunch of photos of the same falls from an observation point where most people take their shots. But because I was able to put my camera in the air, kind of hovering in front of the waterfall at this particular vantage point, I was able to get a shot that I just couldn't get from the ground level or from the observation point. And so I think it's really important to pay attention to that, to look for compositions that are different from, ground level or from wherever you are. And I know that's obvious, but it's important to remind people and myself. Same thing here. So this was taken a couple years ago, and that's Mount Hood over here in the background. But I love the way these larches, kind of the way that they're colored, they're almost directing the eye to Mount Hood. And again, this would be a photo that would be impossible to get from the ground. Basically, it's impossible to get unless you're in the air. And the fact that you don't have to rent a helicopter to get this shot is pretty amazing. So I took this, like I said, a couple years ago during the fall colors season. And it just kind of was one of those happy accidents where the direction of the larches, the way they kind of were planted or grew, point towards Mount Hood. And I kind of wish there was a little bit more snow on Mount Hood, but beggars can't be choosers. And so, like I said, I'm going to give you some examples here. Same thing. If you're going to go and put your camera, so to speak, up in the air, it's really important that you facilitate the viewer's eye so that it's not just kind of a hot mess. And, in this case here, I saw that there was a mountain kind of in the background, and not a mountain, but I guess it's kind of like a hilly mountain. But rather than put the camera or the drone where there's just a bunch of trees, I spent a decent amount of time looking for a vantage point where there's something again that draws the eye kind of through and then up the frame. And so when I saw this little body of water, this little kind of creek flowing through, I thought that was the perfect shot or the perfect composition for this particular scene. And again, it would be completely impossible if I wasn't in the air. There were no vantage points for me to get this photo. So the photo would not exist, period, without that kind of air superiority of the drone. And then finally, here's a bit more of a practical example. So this was sunrise taken in southern Utah. And if I were on the ground, I would completely miss this particular vantage point because by the time I would be able to get the my camera to get the sun, it would already kind of be cresting over the horizon. But because I was able to get the drone up into the air, I was able to get it just breaking over, which I think is really great. And again, it kind of lends itself to the benefits of being able to put your camera in the air. And so again, tip number one is just kind of make the most out of that. Don't just kind of put your camera in the air and let it float around. Actually hunt around a little bit. One of the things that I like to do, especially if the conditions are okay, is I'll put the camera in what's called sport mode. And that kind of disables all of the kind of the proximity sensors. So this Mavic 3 has basically 360 degrees of you could see them right here, the two front ones. There's some on the bottom, they're on the top. And it's a collision sensor, so it prevents the drone from hitting things. If you put the drone in sport mode, it turns those off and it lets you kind of zoom somewhere really quickly. So first thing I make sure of is that it's actually clear of obstruction, and then I zip the drone over to a location. I put it back into kind of the standard or the city mode, and then I look for my shots. So it's all about kind of thinking quickly and just using the advantage of being in the air. All right, so the second tip is also kind of one of those straightforward ones, but I think it's important to remind myself and to share with you, and that is to always look for the best possible composition within where your drone is. So here's an example. I took this. This was actually on the maiden flight, so to speak, of this Mavic 3 just a couple of days ago. This is Lake Coeur d'Alene. The resort is right behind me, and this is where a lot of the people obviously moor their boats. And so you can see here that the shot that I was going for, when I looked at it, I don't spend too much time after I take the photo reviewing things again, because I've got such a limited amount of time before I have to bring the drone back down. So I thought about this, and what I tend to do when I take a shot is I'll change the position of the drone a little bit. Like I'll kind of pan it or strafe it, and then also kind of angle it left and right. And what I found was this shot here. So if we just kind of go from this shot to this shot, all I did was I brought the drone over to the right a little bit, and I kind of swiveled it to the left. And this, in my opinion, gives you a much stronger composition. And actually what I want to do is rotate it, because it looks like the horizon was a little bit crooked. So you can see if we compare the two, and this one also looks a little crooked. There, that's a little bit better. All right, but if you compare the two, it's kind of flat. There's not much separation. All these docks at the bottom here are just kind of positioned there. There's not much to it. Here we get a really nice, pleasing curve in the boardwalk, and I believe actually this is the world's largest freestanding boardwalk. It's pretty cool. It's actually a pretty long boardwalk. It's a lot of fun to walk on. But I really do like the way I get this curve. And then also you get much more depth in the background compared to this photo here, because the drone looked like it was a little bit higher up and I had the camera angled down a little bit. You lose a little bit of that depth compared to this shot. So the camera, I suspect that the altitude was a little bit lower and the camera was a bit more level. So you get, like I said, that nice depth. And so that leads me to my third point, and that also has to do with thinking about the photos that you're taking while the drone's in the air, and that is considering maybe creating a series of kind of related photos. So, perfect example here. I remember this distinctly. I was up in the Lofoten Islands in northern Norway, and I had my drone up in the air, and I mean, it was so cold that I would get maybe 12 to 15 minutes of flying time with my Mavic 2. And I needed to think quickly. And I saw this photo first. So this was obviously the drone is up in the air and the camera's pointing straight down, which is very, very popular, I guess. The really cool thing about the Lofoten Islands is that it's a bunch of these islands that are connected by these roads and bridges. And so you can see here just this kind of abstract photo of this island, and you can see this is where they hang fish to dry. Oh man, it smells pretty gnarly, especially in the summer. But I thought, all right, cool. This is a really cool opportunity to maybe find these different compositions. So I would kind of fly the drone around looking for these unique angles. And so I found this kind of, what you could see here, this kind of triptych almost, as it were, of these three different shots. And actually, the original one, I made this one horizontal, but the original one was like that. So it was more vertical, and you can kind of see the way those three images in the series come together. So that's something that I think is really important when you're using a drone, is to maybe consider a series that kind of join multiple compositions together under a unifying theme. Again, that's not just for drone or aerial photography. That is obvious for any landscape photography. Or architecture photography. Finding themes is a really important and a satisfying endeavor when you're working on creating new photos. Okay, so moving on to the fourth tip. This was another example that I took this yesterday, and I specifically, it's not like I necessarily think the composition is especially good, but it lets me illustrate the point that I want to make, and that has to do with making sure that you mind the horizon. So I first took this photo here, and you can see the way the kind of this body of water just meanders through, but it's super flat. There's no sense of depth, and that's because I had the camera tilted too low. And what I did was I brought the drone, I flew it back a little bit, and I tilted the camera up so that I include the horizon. And notice how much more impactful it is by having all that extra distance, as opposed to this photo, which is just a body of water. It doesn't really give the viewer any sense of where they are or what they're looking at, other than just this curvy body of water. So again, it's one of those things where it's really important when you are composing your shot using the drone in the air, is that you really pay attention to all four walls of the composition, making sure that it makes sense, that it's not just kind of this thing that you're presenting to the viewer, but that you give them something to kind of step through in the frame. Which leads me to the fifth tip, and that has to do with perspective. So how many of you looking at this really know what you're looking at? If I were to just if I didn't know, I would have no idea what I'm looking at. It looks like, I don't know, just some weird earthy mass. I don't even know what it is. And so that's because I haven't provided you with perspective. I just put the drone above this and with the camera pointing straight down, and I took a photo. In reality, what you're looking at is the caldera of a dormant volcano. So you can see here, this is the rim right around here, and looking down into it. But how would you ever know that? Because we're completely almost shooting in a two-dimensional way, you have no sense of depth or height. Which is why I brought the drone back, obviously, and shot it more, the camera more level to the horizon. And then the other thing that I like about this composition, one, you can now tell, obviously, that this is a volcano, or it was a volcano. But I love the sense of scale, the way this road kind of wraps around the volcano, and then also you've got these tiny little cars. So it gives you a sense of just how big, how tall this volcano is. Which is also important in aerial photography, because typically the drone, what you're photographing, it'll look very far away from the drone, because the drone more often than not has a wider focal length. This the Mavic 3, if you see here, has two lenses. So it actually gives you a bit more flexibility in terms of longer focal lengths. But before that, just about every other drone has one focal length. And so, unless you've got the Mavic 2 zoom, which actually allows you to zoom. But point being, it's really important to help the viewer by providing them with a sense of scale. So that's kind of a bonus tip for this one. And again, sense of scale is not just exclusive to aerial photography. It's important to provide scale for just any photo, especially landscape photos when you're using a wide angle lens, because your subject, the wider the focal length, the more further away, the smaller the subject tends to look. So it's important to kind of give the viewer a sense of like, oh yeah, looking at this, you generally have an idea of how wide a road is, for example. You generally have an idea of how large a car is, what the size of an automobile is. So you see a car here, and then you see just how big the volcano is compared to this, which does, I mean, it's a cool abstract shot in a way. I would never do anything with it, but this to me is a much more effective photo. And that whole shooting from the camera pointing straight down leads me to my sixth and final tip. And that has to do with, do not overuse that composition technique, so to speak. Don't overuse that top-down angle. It is so easily abused. I am completely guilty of it. Like, I'm sorry, but I've seen 1,000 of these. I've taken more of these types of photos than I care to admit. I'm not exactly sure what this does for anybody. Same thing with this one. Like, okay, it's just a bunch of trees. This one's in black and white, and this one is in color. So what exactly are you trying to tell people? To me, this is just a hot mess, which is why I wouldn't ever share it. That's not to say that the top-down angle is not powerful. I just think it's important that you are really deliberate about shooting top down. Look for things that evoke some sort of emotion or tell a story. So, for example, I really do love this photo I took. I think this was in Bandon, Oregon, and it's just kind of a rock, position over here with the waves coming at it, and I get the sense of like defiance or power. It's in my head, but I think the composition is really strong in that, the way it's presented, and it really can only be presented in this particular way for it to get that feel. If I were on the ground taking the photo, it wouldn't nearly be as effective. So the top-down angle is very powerful when you are deliberate about it. So again, here, this is shooting top-down on top of a bunch of what's called brain rock. This is also in southern Utah. And it really is pretty, because my point of including this photo is to say that it doesn't always have to be just these obvious elements. Here you've got a lot of these beautiful patterns and color and striation and lines. Also light and shadow play that I think is really, really effective, that you would lose from any other perspective other than the top down. Same thing here. So this I took just yesterday. I love this. Again, a photo that could not exist in this particular way unless you were flying above it and shooting straight down. It's a bunch of these docks that are for the winter. They come together, and I think it's just such a fun photo with so many fun things to explore, all these different shapes and colors. And then if you zoom out, so I just flew the drone a bit further higher in altitude. You can kind of see, I also love this shot because I get the feeling of like these docks are going to break away and then somehow just kind of connect with the larger dock hive. So again, if you're going to shoot top down, just make sure you pay a little extra attention to that you're looking for something that is unique and interesting, not just a bunch of trees. Like, if it floats your boat, if that's what you want, of course, go take it. But I think something like this, where you kind of stoke the viewer's curiosity and you add a little bit of whimsy, I think that's a lot of fun. Like I said, I almost created this video more for myself because I need to remind myself. It's It is intimidating, especially if you're new with drones. And again, like I said, my drone crashed in the lake last year. So you want to make sure that you are making the most out of your time when you've got this device in the air, and always be safe. Make sure you follow your local and federal laws about flying. Don't fly in national parks in the US here, that's forbidden. And just be courteous and conscientious about where your drone is. Drones they're a privilege, they're not a right. And you want to make sure that you're not doing anything to actively hurt or scare local wildlife or flying over private property. Just be respectful. Just be generally a good human being, and everything will be fine. And so if you like this video, I would certainly appreciate it if you clicked on the thumbs up button. Be sure to subscribe and click on the bell icon just so that you get notified every time I put out a new video. And speaking of which, if you like this kind of list style video, I have another one that walks through different tips of how to not take boring landscape photos, but this time with your camera on the ground. You don't have to worry about it being in the air. So I hope you enjoy that one, and I will see you next time.